People think betrayal always arrives loudly, with shouting or dramatic scenes, but sometimes it slips in quietly and waits for the worst possible moment to show itself. My name is Grace, and this is the story I never wanted to tell but had to live through. I was a wife who believed in loyalty, a family who believed in unity, and a future I thought was secure. What I didn't know was that behind polite smiles and shared dinners, greed and secrets were already fighting over my life. This story isn't about violence or screaming revenge. It's about patience, truth, and how silence can be sharper than any weapon. If you've ever been betrayed by people you trusted, stay with me, because what happened after my husband's death changed everything I thought I knew about love, family, and justice. I never imagined grief could be so loud and so quiet at the same time, and that contradiction followed me everywhere after Daniel died. The house felt crowded with people but empty of comfort, full of footsteps and murmurs yet hollow where his presence used to be. Neighbors came with casseroles, coworkers sent flowers, and his family filled the living room with forced sympathy. Mark and Elise, Daniel's adult children from his first marriage, stayed close to each other and far from me. When Elise hugged me, her arms felt stiff, like she was checking a box. When Mark shook my hand, his eyes drifted past me to the walls, the furniture, the family photos. I told myself they were grieving in their own way. I told myself not everyone cries the same. But something felt off, like I was standing in the wrong place in my own life. At night, when the house finally emptied, the silence became unbearable. I would sit on the edge of the bed and talk to Daniel as if he could still hear me. "Why did you leave me like this?" I whispered once. Another night I said, "I don't know how to do this without you." There was no answer, only the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the clock we bought together. One evening, desperate for something familiar, I opened Daniel's laptop to look for photos for the memorial slideshow. His password still worked. That small detail broke me all over again. As I scrolled through folders, memories flickered across the screen. Vacations, birthdays, ordinary days that now felt sacred. Then an email notification popped up. I didn't mean to read it, but the subject line froze me. "We need to be more careful." My chest tightened, I clicked it, then another, then another. My hands started shaking as the truth unfolded in cold, typed sentences. Daniel had been having an affair for years, not with a coworker, not with a stranger, with his ex-wife Linda, Elise's mother. The woman who smiled politely at me during holidays and hugged me at Daniel's funeral. I whispered out loud, "This can't be real." But it was. The emails were detailed, emotional, and planned. They talked about secret meetings, shared accounts, and promises to protect the kids. Worse than the affair itself was what came next. Messages between Mark and Elise discussing how to move money quietly, how to make sure I didn't notice changes in accounts. Elise wrote, "She trusts Dad completely." Mark replied, "Good. Let's keep it that way." I felt like I was falling through the floor of my own life. I sat there in the dark for hours, rereading messages until my eyes burned. Every late night Daniel claimed was work, every cold dinner he barely touched, every time he turned away when I reached for him. It all made sense now, and that realization hurt more than the betrayal itself. At the funeral, I watched Mark cry loudly and Elise cling to my arm. "We're family," Elise whispered. Mark nodded and said Dad would want us united. But later, I overheard them in the hallway. "The land alone is worth a fortune," Mark said quietly. Elise replied, "We need to move fast before she gets ideas." I stood there unseen, my heart pounding so hard I thought they might hear it. That night, I realized something changed inside me. I wasn't just a grieving widow anymore. I was a woman surrounded by people who had lied to my face for years. Daniel wasn't the only one who betrayed me. As I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I asked myself one terrifying question. If this was what I had already found, what else was waiting for me in the dark? I didn't confront them right away, and that decision saved me. Grief had stripped me raw, but it also sharpened my instincts. I learned quickly that silence makes people careless, and Mark and Elise were very careless. They assumed I was broken, distracted, too emotional to notice anything. At the kitchen table one morning, Mark said, "We should probably meet the lawyer soon, Grace. Dad wouldn't want things dragged out." Elise nodded and added, "It's better for everyone if we settle the estate quickly." I smiled weakly and said, "Of course," while my mind raced. They thought I was cooperating, I was observing. Every day I gathered pieces of the truth. Bank statements hidden in folders Daniel never mentioned, emails forwarded to private accounts. A signed agreement between Daniel and Linda outlining shared assets and future plans. I printed everything and organized it carefully. When I finally met Mr. Holloway, Daniel's longtime estate lawyer, I didn't cry. I placed the folder on his desk and said, "I need you to read this before the will reading." He adjusted his glasses, flipped through the pages, and his face slowly tightened. "Mrs. Carter, he said quietly, this changes things. I replied, I know. The will reading was held in a small conference room that smelled like old paper and coffee. Mark sat across from me, arms crossed, confidence written all over his face. Elise sat beside her mother, Linda, who avoided my eyes. Before Holloway began, Mark spoke up. I just want to say Dad was very clear about his wishes, he said. Elise added, he loved Grace, but he also wanted to protect his children. I felt heat rise in my chest but stayed quiet. When accusations started, they came fast. You manipulated him, Mark said sharply. Elise leaned forward and said, you married him for security. Don't pretend otherwise. I looked at Holloway and nodded. I slid the folder across the table. Please, I said, continue. Holloway opened it and began explaining. These documents show undisclosed assets and intentional concealment during the marriage, he said calmly. Elise's face drained of color. That's not what this is, she said quickly. Mark snapped, you don't understand. Holloway raised his hand. I understand very well. And there are legal consequences. Linda whispered, Daniel said this wouldn't matter. Holloway replied, Daniel was mistaken. The room shifted. Confidence turned to panic. Elise stared at Mark, her voice shaking. You said this was safe. Mark stood up. This is ridiculous, he said. She's twisting things. I finally spoke. I didn't create these emails, I said softly. You did. Silence followed. Holloway cleared his throat. There is more to discuss, he said. I saw fear flicker across their faces, and for the first time since Daniel died, I felt something close to steady. But as Holloway closed the folder, I knew this wasn't over yet. What Mark and Elise didn't know was that Daniel had already confessed months before his death. One night he came home pale and shaking, sat across from me and said, I've ruined everything. I remember asking, what are you talking about? He told me about the affair, the money, the lies. He cried and said, please don't leave me, help me fix this. I agreed, not because I forgave him, but because I needed to understand the full truth. We met with Mr. Holloway privately and revised the estate plan. Daniel insisted on one final clause written in his own words. If they've been lying, he said, they shouldn't benefit from it. Back in the conference room, Holloway explained the conditions of the inheritance. Distribution depends on compliance with these terms, he said. Mark smirked. Elise squeezed her mother's hand, then Holloway continued. Any heir involved in hiding assets, facilitating fraud, or coercing secrecy forfeits their share. The room erupted. That's unfair, Mark shouted. Elise cried, we were protecting family. Linda said sharply, this is a setup. Holloway stayed calm. The documentation has been verified. Mark pointed at me. You planned this, he accused. I met his eyes. I survived this, I replied. Holloway prepared to read the final clause. The room fell silent. My heart pounded as years of betrayal closed in on them, and I wondered if Daniel's last decision would finally speak louder than their lies. The final clause was simple, and it ended everything. Holloway read, the remaining estate shall be placed in a charitable trust supporting spouses affected by financial deception, administered by my wife. Mark laughed nervously. That's not real, he said. Elise whispered, Mom. Linda said nothing. Holloway looked up. It is very real, he said, and legally binding. They received nothing, no house, no land, no accounts. The room went quiet. We'll sue, Mark threatened. Holloway replied, you can try. Elise sobbed. Dad wouldn't do this, I said softly. He already did. In the weeks that followed, they disappeared from my life, still angry, still blaming me. I sold the house and moved somewhere smaller, quieter. Running the trust gave my pain purpose. People ask if revenge healed me. It didn't. Truth did. Betrayal always costs more than honesty. And the greatest inheritance I received wasn't money. It was freedom. Thank you for staying with me through this story. Betrayal doesn't always end with dramatic explosions. Sometimes it ends with quiet justice and hard-earned clarity. If this story resonated with you, remember that patience and truth can be more powerful than anger. On this channel, we tell stories not to glorify revenge, but to show that karma has many forms and sometimes it arrives wrapped in silence. If you've experienced betrayal or are still carrying unanswered questions, know that you're not alone. Healing doesn't mean forgetting, it means choosing yourself. Until next time, take care of your heart, trust your instincts, and remember that no lie stays buried forever.